Tom Woodward. I work at Virginia Commonwealth University. I am the Associate Director for Learning Innovation, and this is...
I am Jeff Everhart, also from VCU. Work as a web developer with Tom's group.
Okay. All right, so we're going to get rolling here because we have lots of random examples and I think interesting patterns to look at. And we're talking about getting students involved in gathering data in a variety of different scenarios. One thing to kind of point out is we're a pretty small shop. It's just the three of us. And so we do a lot of work directly with faculty and a lot of work that's pretty fast. So some of our stuff, mainly my stuff maybe, won't be as pretty or as polished as a lot of the things you'll see later. But we're going to try and walk that line between quick and dirty, kind of fast and easy, and then how it becomes more complex, but it takes a little more time, and then just identifying patterns that are worth kind of taking from that simple, fast exploration phase and making into something more concrete and sophisticated. Just to give you an overview of some of the tools we use, a lot of the stuff you'll see here will have gravity forms in terms of structuring content authoring. We've also used Press This back when it was part of WordPress core. We're kind of revisiting it now with the recent changes. And Facet WP is something we found really useful for on the fly being able to sort all the different data that you gather. Jeff's also taken Leaflet and View to do some more sophisticated interactions, which we'll get into momentarily. Let's skip tips for now. We'll get right into details. So we'll call this example number one. We have a number of world languages, and what they're doing is students are made authors on a variety of different WordPress sites, and they are going out and finding multimedia that they actually like in the target language and using Press This and the ability to restrict categories by author type. They're associating those multimedia pieces with particular categories. That's everything from the media type to particular verb tenses, that sort of thing. They do this in Spanish, Arabic, German, Italian, French, etc., Russian, which leads to some interesting stuff. So this is kind of a level one process, which is just students adding metadata to multimedia artifacts. But they then harvest this. Yeah, we could go full screen maybe. Sorry, or maybe not. We'll do it like this, but now I won't be able to see if it changed anything for you. So maybe that's full screen for you. This is the next step where we have students essentially finding examples of Gestalt graphic design theory in real life, and then logging them to a central repository where they're viewable by particular Gestalt theory attributes. So you've got a simple interface with Facet WP letting you blend through this. You got your basic default WordPress, I don't know, 2015 theme, and then you have the descriptions that the students are logging via this. But all they're doing is really with their phones, they're filling out these web forms that have particular structures. In this case, it's front-end editing. They're not doing anything fancy, like I said, but it is kind of oriented around them just getting the lens of analysis active in their real life and figuring out like that these things apply outside the classroom. And then the teacher is able to take all this repository materials and use it in the class. So kind of cool. We have another class which is about race and aesthetics in the environment that is Richmond. So we are in Richmond, Virginia, and we've got students out here actually participating in logging evidence of African-American studies and race and space as they coincide in the environment. You see a little more sophistication in terms of the analysis. But you can really make these sort of things basically anything you want. So far we're kind of combining text or categorization with multimedia, but you can also add in elements like geographical data. This is a course that ended up surveying Richmond, the city, as part of urban studies to see like what's how does our city sit in terms of being able to provide a robust opportunity for people to bike instead of use cars? So, we're just integrating here just some latitude and longitude coordinates, and once again, kind of orienting the submissions to phone types of submissions. This is a step a little bit farther. We have a field botany course that's played out in the James River Park system, which is a series of parks here. And this is meant to both educate and guide the analysis of plant species. So what students are able to do is come here, and essentially this both helps them visually see as well as these textual explanations. So it is both a form and a learning material. So if I chose opposite, it's going to move me down to this next choice. Is this simple or compound? We'll say simple. It's lobed. And then through the process of starting to kind of break down this dichotomous key, we're filling in a bunch of stuff and populating it via these URL parameters. And we end up with a giant database of plants gathered across our park system here. Not perfect, right? So you see this spleen wart is not showing up, but we've gotten thousands and thousands of plants logged, and it's been an interesting communal model with, once again, Facet WP providing us the ability to sort through a bunch of this stuff really fast to find different examples and then to go to them. So those are, just a quick spectrum of the Gravity Forms kind of front-facing editor options. Jeff's going to break down a little more sophistication in terms of when we start to go from there.
The tips. Yeah, we kind of looked at some examples.
Good point. Tips. As we've been through this, and we've done this with a lot of different classes in a lot of different subject areas, these are kind of like basic things. They may be obvious to you, but restrict choice if you want consistency. If you can make it multiple choice or, a radio button, do it. If you don't mind it being anything under the sun, then leave it an empty text field. We talk about automating the inconsequential. So if you don't want students thinking about something and it's not part of the assignment and you still need it to happen, make it happen magically in the background without them noticing. And then you're going to need to force the required. So if people can leave a field blank, good chance it'll happen. So make that a required element.
And I think we also see this a lot in examples where we might need the students to actually be logged into the WordPress instance if the authorship of a particular piece of content is important. So what I end up doing is in those instances where a professor needs something, but they need to see which students might have authored which post, wrapping something in a login block is the go-to there.
For Gravity Forms, like one of those tips I learned the hard way is if you can use custom fields to hold data, particularly structured data, do that because it's really easy to tie that in later on into WP Query or into Facet WP for display options. That will give you a lot of flexibility and benefits, and you can still do all the select from the following or radio buttons and that sort of thing. You're just storing the data in a custom field.
Well, in some of the more complex examples we're going to look at in just a minute, we're pulling some of those custom fields back through the WordPress API. And really, I think the custom fields gives you a lot of extensibility there. And if you're willing to use them flexibly, WordPress can act kind of as just any kind of blanket relational database scheme that you want. So allows you to make really robust content types from the one, just by extending the basic post or creating your own custom post type.
The other thing is, I think you want the minimal amount of technology possible. So if you can do something on a front end and learning technology isn't part of the course, doing that makes good sense. How simple can you make it for the users to get done what they want, or the students, versus if they're going to need to go back and revise things, if there's going to be a lot of back end work, that's a different scenario, but it comes with the overhead of having to learn a chunk about WordPress. And with most faculty conversations, that's a hardship. So if it's a necessary thing, you just have to be upfront about that. But otherwise, it's how simple can we make this? We'll talk about patterns.
Yeah, and so one of the other things that we definitely recommend is to, as you're working through these things and building things for people, so try and identify patterns that you see repeatedly, and then take those patterns and build them into more generally applicable tools. And so the two next things we'll show you are kind of examples of ways that we've approached that problem. Because one of the things that we find is that something like Gravity Forms or Fastest WP allows you to move very quickly, but as we start to need to do that again or do it for another course, copying things over becomes a little bit fragile. So thinking about ways you can take some of those front-end editing tools and build them into more robust plugins or themes is definitely the way to go for kind of long-term maintainability and to get a wide use across a number of different courses. So we'll take a look at, I'll take over time. Yeah, that's cool. We'll take a look at two projects that we've been working on recently. So the first that we'll take a look at kind of stemmed from our repeated requests to build some sort of mapping application. So obviously we live in Richmond. It's a really interesting environment, very urban, a lot of socioeconomic stuff happening here that is of interest to a lot of our faculty members and students. And so from this, we decided, okay, well, I know Tom showed you the example of the bicycle urbanism. We said, how can we extend that? How can we make a broadly applicable mapping tool that could be used across a bunch of different disciplines? And this is what we kind of came up with, and we'll take a look at it in just a second. But just to give you all kind of an understanding of how we took something that was a gravity form collecting longitude and latitude and built that into a more robust kind of plug and play application. Decided to wrap all of this in a theme. And we have an often internal debate about when something needs to be a plugin, when something needs to be a theme. If you look at this and follow the link here, see that it's highly customized. We've got some really specific pages that we need to either explore the data that the students have created or add additional points. So we decided to just wrap that in a theme. And some of the things we've done to kind of try and make this a little bit more user-friendly. So we have all of these pages that we know we're going to need. We're going to need a place to display our map. We're going to need a place to pull out the individual points. We're going to need a page to add individual points to the map. So we're in our functions.php, we're auto-loading and auto-generating those pages if they don't exist whenever the theme is activated, so that that's not something that the faculty member has to worry about. We can go ahead, take that theme, drop it into their new site on a multi-site instance, and just go right ahead. Beyond that, we're using the WordPress REST API to grab a lot of those custom post types, those map points. We've used to store the latitude and longitude data, and then using Leaflet.js to actually display in the map and integrate some of that. And we'll go pop this open in another screen. I guess that's open over there already. And so we'll take a look at just some of the cool things I think that this allows them to do. So obviously we've got an overview map, and just like in the bicycle urbanism example, it allows you to kind of store some media associated with a particular post type, allows the student to then go through and author a more robust example of, or more robust research piece regarding that particular point in space. One of the things that we initially developed this project for was a project called the Contested City, where we have a class from our School of Public Policy going around looking at these different types of gentrification, places of commemoration. So adding in a way for them to create a map point and associate that with particular categories was really important, so that we could then filter that later. And that could be a different analytical lens that they use to look at and compare some of these different places. But again, GitHub repo out there for anybody that's interested. So we'll take a look at another example, something a little bit more customized. DaVinci, okay. I'll pop over here and just give a quick overview of what we're looking at real quick. So this is an interesting project that we spent a lot of time working on over our fall semester. And it's a little bit different in the sense that the data that we're collecting with the students is really more about their interactions and produced passively by the way they use the application. And I'll explain what that means in just a second. So what we did is we were working with a group from the DaVinci Center here at VCU, and they're a group focused on entrepreneurship and innovation, and they had a living learning program where you had a bunch of cohorts of students who had all these extracurricular activities that they needed to participate in for credit as a part of the program, but they didn't have a great way to track it or really a great way to advertise events. And so what we decided to do is we've got a really good mix of everything along that spectrum in this particular project. We're using Gravity Forms to do some things. We're using some premium plugins like Event Calendar Pro to populate a calendar. But then we've combined all that with some more sophisticated stuff using Vue and the REST API to kind of build out a really robust application analytics dashboard so that the people can monitor the students' progress through the program. But I'll just give you kind of an overview here. We've got the site where students can submit events using a Gravity form that then the people who curate the calendar can go in, approve or deny, and then it will get sucked up into that calendar feed. But what we've done here is we've really tried to stick to that motto of include only what's necessary and make it dead simple for the student. So we have on our multi-site installation a registration process or a registration flow that we can use. But we decided since we were going to have a lot of students using this was just to build that in to the site itself using Gravity Forms. And so that's really a great handy way if you want to get somebody registered to a particular site really quickly, but don't want them to have to go through a long entire registration flow through your typical multi-site installation. You can do that really easily through Gravity Forms. And so one of the issues that this was solving was, for instance, we needed to collect data about the students. We needed to get them in there logging their reflections on these particular events. And so if we go to a particular event, the students can come in here, look at the event details, and then down here they can actually submit reflections based on their experiences at these particular events. And so just going back to our discussion of custom fields earlier, a lot of this stuff is stored in custom fields. Each event has a particular hour worth, and the students need to obtain a certain amount of hours over their time in the program to complete it. So we were also trying to give those faculty members some ways to look at that and to analyze the types of events that they have. And so we went through a couple of iterations on how to display this student data back out. And so I'll go to an early one. Let's see if this URL is correct. So this was an initial attempt that we made at kind of manifesting the student progress. And so we obviously pull out all the students. We give a current group total of how many total hours that they've accumulated. But we found that this wasn't producing a ton of insights for the faculty members. Yes, they could look at an individual student and check their progress, but as you can see, we've got a lot of students here. We've got to keep scrolling, looking for stuff. So we went back to the drawing board and decided to, that's not where I wanted to go. Decided to take a slightly different approach using Vue.js and the WordPress REST API to build out a pretty robust single-page dashboard. And so we've got some spark lines here pulling out some of the really important details for the faculty members. So total events attended, how many hours logged, how many reflections have been submitted. But one of the things that we thought was really neat was since we had all of the student interaction details, there were a lot of cool ways that we could visualize this data that we pull from the REST API. So here we did a little D3 work and created a network graph of all of the different student interactions. And we did this for one reason, and it's because the whole purpose behind this living learning program was the cross-pollination of ideas between students in the departments of business, engineering, arts and sciences, and the humanities. So we're looking at what happens when we put all those types of people together, what kind of cool ideas can come. So we've got each one of these majors color-coded here, and so we can actually visualize those interactions. So what we're really looking at is to identify, who are the highly participating students, where there are a lot of connections, and then where maybe do we have students who aren't necessarily as engaged as the other people. So anyone at the edge of one of these networks is kind of on the fringes, not necessarily making those connections with other students. And so provides the faculty members with some real-time insight into what the students are doing, how they're interacting, so that they can then go and follow up with them. So we've done that. We also wanted them to be able to look specifically at events, because the students, as a part of their reflections, go through and give some different ratings about each particular event. And so some examples are, I'm confident I can use some of the things I've learned today, and then my current overall assessment of my experience in the living learning program. So we give them some breakdowns by events so that they know, hey, what was really successful, what maybe didn't sit so well with the students, so that as they refine their programming from year to year, they can use this to make those types of decisions. And again, this is all just a single page application through Vue.js, so we can click around and open up different specific views to look at individual events and look at the individual students who've submitted them, and then vice versa, pull up individual students where we can look at their progress, look at their reflection hours over time to make sure that they're appropriately stretching those out over the semester, and then look at all of the reflections that they've submitted. So a couple different ways that we can explore that data set, all kind of stored with the WordPress backend. Cool. So I'll kick it back over to Tom.
Yeah, well, what I hope we're showing, and let me exit out of full screen here, so maybe I can see if we're generating any questions yet. Is that both there are interesting patterns here that enable us to build stuff really quickly with students, and a lot of the stuff I did didn't really even require any sophistication in terms of knowing programming. You're just taking advantage of the Gravity Forms kind of interface with WordPress to structure some stuff. Pretty much anyone can do it. We can put it in the hands of faculty. We can put it in the hands of students. But you also see Jeff taking it to an entirely different level in some really sophisticated ways to help programs analyze themselves, which is something you don't typically see WordPress used for, that I'm aware of. And we have a variety of additional examples, in different disciplines that have been used as well. Anyone seen anything they want to see live, deeper questions, that sort of thing?
We had a question.
All right, we got some questions.
Data portability in Grab. Oh, we got 3.
All right. From Cody. Well, since most of the time in Gravity Forms we're replicating it to the WordPress posts, we don't have as much portability problems. If you leave it all in Gravity Forms and their database and tables, I think you do end up having to deal with some of that if you're not going to tie into the API. And even there, I don't know how that would play when you move it between sites. So I think if you duplicate it to the WordPress side of things, I think it'll save you some headaches.
Yeah, and I think in the example of the DaVinci, I've had to, obviously, to do some of that local development, I've had to export a lot of their reflection questions and answers. And as long as stuff was stored appropriately in the custom fields, we were generally pretty good just using an export.
All right. Public submissions to forms. We haven't had a lot of drama with spam.
So.
I do have some forms, Gravity Forms, that I put on sites, and it sends me an email that indicates it's triggered, but I don't remember where it is. So that's a tip. Maybe if you make a Gravity Form, maybe do a hidden field that tells you what site it's associated with. We have 28,000 sites. So sometimes I'll forget even what it's associated with broadly. So those ghost submissions are coming in. But not a ton on spam. You can set the Gravity Form permissions to either go live with the post immediately or require, an editorial approval. So that's one of the things we do to get around some concerns faculty have about privacy and whatnot.
Yeah, and I think that's a good example. If we look at the Living Learning Program example, the DaVinci site, that was one where we've got a Gravity Form there that'll let the student submit the event, but it comes in default as a draft. And then the faculty members have to go back in and publish it. And I will kind of reiterate that I think the one downside of the public submission is like you lose that authorship sometimes because you typically have to associate a default author with that form. So generally I'll go in and I'll look at a class, for example, that's submitted a bunch of stuff and everything's published by Tom because Tom's the person who submitted that form. And so just understanding, kind of what you give up doing that versus the complexity of having to build out a submission form that would create a custom post type, that would use the current logged in author, which then you have a lot of other issues. You've got to first log them in, then you've got to build a more, robust form. I guess you could use gravity forms too, but then you got to log them in.
Right.
So there's, trade-offs.
Yeah. So FERPA, which is an inevitable question in anything in higher ed, I think.
Yeah.
I guess the short answer is we haven't run into issues. It tends to be something we discuss depending on what's being asked for. Most of the times, this is not evaluative. Most of the time, we're not asking details about the student themselves. Usually, they're essentially creating work, and that work is usually outlined in the syllabus as public in nature, and they have the option to take other courses that perhaps don't have that public nature component. So that's one of the things that goes into this. Will that satisfy everyone's legal counsel? I don't know. But it's the way we've been navigating, is being very upfront with both faculty and students about the intent and the audience, and giving people the ability to, in our case, our WordPress multi-site is not tied into the EID system. It does require a VCU email, so we can have students who decide to create pseudonymous accounts. So rather than being Tom Woodward, I could be Magic Unicorn Guy. And so I could be publicly associated with an identifiable account, but that account is not publicly associated with me as an individual in real life. So that's another way we're trying to give some people some flexibility to both kind of build something that they might continue on and claim ownership, or if they want to shed that skin when they graduate and want nothing to do with it, that possibility is there as well. All right. The question is, if you could detail the moving of Gravity Forms data to custom post types and how that could be available on a multi-site to all sites. Well, I think there's an additional plugin that'll let you map Gravity Forms to custom post types. I'll add that to the slide deck. It's nothing fancy that I came up with.
Just selecting something else from a drop-down menu.
Right. And for our Gravity Forms, it is network activated. So all of our sites have Gravity Forms as an option. And then we can network activate whatever plugins we want, or individually activate subsets. Like, we don't have custom post type for Gravity Forms type turned on for everyone, but we turn it on when needed. And if we wanted to, we could network activate it. Mm-hmm. And I did see in the text field, the hidden fields you can add to Gravity Forms. That's another thing I really like about the product, is you can have stuff that auto logs IP, etc. You can do all that stuff if you remember to do it. And in some cases, I did not. So that's nice. And the other thing that's really slick is you can provision all of these fields, hidden or not, via URL parameters. And that can be really handy. In addition, just some shortcode parameters that you can turn on when you embed it that automatically fill in certain fields, depending, for instance, on where Gravity Forms is. So we can show more examples. We can try and answer some more questions. Trying to see here. Yep, still FERPA. All right. We could build a form.
Go for it.
All right. We can try and build one live for for anyone who's still in attendance here, maybe to show you how easy it is, I'll build a simple one that'll create posts. We'll see if without autocomplete. There we go. All right, so to do this sort of stuff in Gravity Forms, I want to stress, like, you don't have to be good at technology, right? All I'm doing is saying form, new form. I'm going to name it. Give me a post, and what I've got here are these post fields. So I'm just going to be able to expand it. The title is going to be the title of the post. The body is going to be the body. And you can also do tags and categories, just to show you a little bit about the options there. Like for tags, we could do something like this, which we often do, is go to advanced. We'll make it hidden, and then we'll set a default value of test. So in that way, everything submitted via this will be in the category test, but students won't have to put it there. So that's one way to get it consistency and sophistication, and you can do lots of stuff with that possibility.
Mm-hmm. And then right next to that, I would say that custom field, post field is definitely your friend as well. You can hop that in there. And then that's how you can really kind of activate that richness of getting really robust data in here.
One thing just in terms of like, hey, how Gravity Forms works is, hit update frequently. Otherwise, you'll be like, why can't I see certain things when I activate these? But the other thing that'll be really handy for you is being able to create content templates with these merge tags. So any of the form fields can be merged then into these content templates. So sometimes we might have stuff that shows up as a custom field and is also in the body of the post. You could certainly build a theme out that's going to support that in terms of actually showing the custom fields, but you can actually just throw them in either as raw text or reference them with, there's a couple of short code generators that'll let you show that sort of stuff. But so if this was our example, maybe we want to add a featured image as well. We can do that, and then we'll see it live. So we can set that as the featured image. So there's just so much that Gravity Forms will let you do out of the box, in addition to being really flexible in terms of writing extensions that'll let you make this more sophisticated. For instance, to get at some of the FERPA stuff, perhaps, we did set one with a little bit of a plugin that set a default password on the post that was created this way. So we had public data in that you didn't have to be logged in to see it, but to see the actual content, you had to know the password. So that's one of those kind of gray areas between some stuff. Somebody asked if we've used Gravity Flow for workflow and approval stuff. I haven't. We used Gravity Fields, I think is the one, for some table-based displays and interactions, which I think is by the same group, although I'm not sure. But it's one of those things I have on the back burner. If we got into a sophisticated workflow type of process, that's certainly one I'd check out. We do a lot of that type of work in Google Forms with Google Scripts. Mm-hmm. But just as a quick example here, stuff. Don't know what field we map that to, maybe nothing. If you have fields available, they show up. You can also create your own. Sometimes I've had issues with that, so usually I make sure the fields exist before trying to activate it there. Ooh, connector add-ons to Oracle. No, because they wouldn't let us do that here. we would not be allowed to tie into any of those things.
Well, what we have done that's kind of similar to that is we have a couple sites where I think they've published some ODS like data feeds that we've needed to use in WordPress, and we've actually like wrapped those data feeds in API calls that we can then kind of use through WordPress in a little bit more responsibly of a manner. I don't know if that.
So dynamic fields with hooks to pull in data from DB. I've seen some ways to do that. I'm trying to think if we have, because I looked into doing it based on essentially like if we have X number of custom fields submitted, can we take those custom fields and use them to provision the gravity form? And there are ways to do that. I can't think of an example where we have off the top of my head. So we got a couple more questions in there. Cody's asking how many sites and users. We have 28,000 sites right now, 25,000 users on this multi-site. We support, I don't know, 12 or 15 external WordPress sites that are single installs, and then a couple other things. Jeff would be in a good place to.
Yeah. So the question is, was there a usability reason why you created a theme for the map content versus a map content type in an existing website theme? And I guess our usability reason might have just been we really wanted to force an opinionated layout. And so I'm not sure just building a custom post type as like a plugin or something else would have allowed us to do that, I think, in the way that we wanted. So that was also partially my decision. I don't know that I have any other reasons. Then I found a really good looking scholarly atlas that was done by the folks at Emory University, and kind of wanted to replicate that look and feel. So I think it was more an aesthetic choice than anything else. The other thing I did want to mention there is, I guess, no, that's about it. That's probably it. Let's go with aesthetics.
Yeah, I think that's an ongoing struggle for me personally. It's like a lot of times the faculty are going to want you to make the aesthetic choices in these things anyway. Mm-hmm. And so if you can get them really close with the default theme, plug-in, capability mix, then honestly they're happier not to think about a chunk of that.
Yeah.
But that could just be, some of the faculty here that we tend to work with. And two, it's speed. Like you're not trying to rethink, what's causing us a hassle in this particular scenario, because you built both sides. It's a bit like Apple hardware, software, assuming you're not running High Sierra.
Yeah.
In which case,
like we are.
No excuse. I am. But that sort of balance, I think, tends to blend the functionality.
Yeah. It's definitely a control thing. Like instead of, and we've done that where we've developed, kind of like some sort of rich media functionality into plugins, and inevitably we run into conflicts with trying to make that as vanilla as possible. Where this, I think, we're like, okay, if we can control it a little bit more at that point, if they want it to look a little bit differently, we can throw in some custom CSS or something to, restyle the header bars or something along those lines to make them happy. When in reality, most of them don't really care about that. They're after the educational goal and not anything else.
Yeah, I think, I hope we've shown a spectrum of opportunities for students to be creating work that can become either, documented work in its own right. This is what the student did. Document it right in aggregate. The work matters because you have lots of it and you can start to analyze it in a different way. That could be Gestalt examples from our locale. It could be field botany data. It could be water turbidity measurements. I've got an example, a proof of concept of that someplace. But there's just a spectrum of ways you can guide student interaction or faculty interaction that creates standardized stuff and puts it in a giant database. Then the way in which you interact with that database, the world's your oyster. And it's just an ongoing pattern that has lots of flexibility and potential to create open educational materials, to create ways to analyze programs, to create ways to get students deeply involved with their local community. Because I think that's one of the university challenges we're trying to make headway on, is like, all right, if everything could be done online in terms of degrees, how do you make the locale matter? And getting students out in the community and then being able to bring that community to a central digital place for additional reflection and consideration, or sharing with people who might be in other locations. I think those opportunities are really powerful and open up, just a world of possibilities for faculty members and for students, and for rethinking, what does online, what does face-to-face, what does blended mean now? And WordPress is just an easy, simple way to do it that takes care of a chunk of the work.
And I would also just kind of underscore that most of our solutions tend to be really iterative, and that we, like I said in the beginning, one of those tips was early on, identify those patterns. What are those things you're getting requests for over and over again? And then work toward a more generally applicable solution. But none of the stuff that I feel like, at least that I've released that first go around to a class in the wild, works in every way, the way that I want and the way the faculty member wants. So you've got to kind of keep iterating on that and exploring and getting feedback.
Yeah, and I shared stuff with you that I personally find visually offensive, and I'm responsible for it. So that is me being vulnerable in public with you, and some of this is like, I might make something and then the faculty does something to it because they want to, and it's cool that they can, and it doesn't always mean that I agree with that choice. And other things, we're talking about development cycles of, they sat down at a table with us for 30 minutes. We have something workable, they walk off and they're happy. So we're talking about really fast kind of responsive building that is customized, which is a kind of a nice possibility. The other thing I might encourage you to check out, if you're into like really simple basic tools for kind of front end users, is there's splot.ca, which Alan Levine and Brian Lamb's up in Thompson Rivers University, and Alan Levine is Cogdog Blog, free agent. But they came up with a variety of just forward-facing, really simple tools like this that are really worth checking out if any of this interests you at all.
And a lot of their stuff, I think, is also theme-based. So
yes.
You kind of just plug and play,
yeah.
Activate the theme, and you've got all of the functionality that you need to do whatever thing it purports to do.